It was a stormy night when James, a seasoned travel blogger, checked into the old Marlowe Hotel. It had been years since he'd stayed anywhere like this, dusty chandeliers, worn-out carpets, and creaking floors. But he loved the charm of historic places, and the Marlowe had one thing that intrigued him most: Room 312. Rumors circulated about the room, and despite hearing the warnings, James couldn't resist. He asked the receptionist for the key, grinning. "Is it true?" he asked with a teasing tone. "That room's haunted?" The receptionist's face paled, and for a moment it seemed as though she might say something serious. But instead she handed him the key with trembling hands. "If you insist," she whispered, "just be careful. Don't look into the mirror." James laughed, brushing it off as a superstition. "Thanks, I'll be fine." The elevator doors creaked open, and James made his way to the third floor. As he entered room 312, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, causing the curtains to flutter. The room seemed almost too perfect, too still, like a place caught between time. But in the far corner he saw it, an antique mirror framed in dark, ornate wood leaning against the wall. Without a second thought, James set down his bag and moved toward it. As his reflection stared back at him, he felt an odd sense of unease, like the air had thickened, pressing in on him. The mirror seemed off. He turned away, shaking his head. "It's just a mirror," he muttered to himself, but the feeling wouldn't go away. As night fell, James sat on the edge of the bed, writing notes for his blog. The wind howled outside and the rain pounded against the windows. But in the stillness of the room, something began to shift. From the corner of his eye, James saw a flicker of movement. He glanced toward the mirror, and for a brief moment his reflection smiled. But James did not. His blood ran cold. He stood frozen, staring at the mirror. The reflection was no longer his own. It was wrong. The figure in the glass twisted and contorted, its smile widening unnaturally. The eyes in the reflection weren't his, pale, hollow, and devoid of life. Suddenly, the mirror's surface began to ripple like water. The reflection of James stepped out of the glass, its feet crossing the threshold of reality, into the room. James stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest. He could hear his own voice in his head, telling him to run, to get away, but his body wouldn't obey. The reflection, his double, smirked cruelly, its eyes dark and empty. "You wanted to see me," the figure whispered in a voice that was his, but not his at the same time. "Now you'll join me." Before James could react, the figure lunged, grabbing his wrist with an unnatural strength. It pulled him toward the mirror, and as if the glass was no longer solid, James was sucked into it. The last thing he saw before he was consumed was his own terrified face, trapped on the other side, staring back at him. The next morning, the staff at the Marlowe Hotel found room 312 empty, save for the mirror. They found no trace of James, no sign of struggle. His belongings were gone, and the only thing left in the room was his camera, resting on the bed, still recording. When the hotel manager played back the footage, the last thing he saw was James standing in front of the mirror, his reflection smiling back at him. But it wasn't James smiling. The footage ended with a horrifying scream and the sound of the mirror cracking. No one ever stayed in room 312 again. And if you ever visit the Marlowe Hotel, they'll warn you about the mirror. But don't make the mistake of looking into it, because once you see the reflection, it might just decide to see you back.